Welcome to this mini episode of Confidential Bulletin, where we delve deeper into pressing Ask CRA topics. There are some issues that members are eager to explore in detail beyond what our partners can cover in a few minutes. This is the Ask CRA mini episode with our legal partners.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I'm Anthony Zaller with the Zaller Law Group, and I'm here today with Veenita Raj, a senior attorney at the law firm. The Zaller Law Group is proud to be a partnered law firm with the California Restaurant Association. And today on the podcast, we wanted to talk about California's new requirements for the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan and the deadline coming up here on July 1st, 2024 for California employers to comply with this new requirement, what it entails. We're going to discuss it briefly. We're going to take 10, 15 minutes here today. Veenita and I are going to go over that and hopefully give a broad overview of the obligations here that employers need to start with even before July 1st. We're just talking about some of the obligations here. So we're going to jump right into it. Veenita, do you want to start off with which employers this applies to and whether certain employers are exempted from this requirement?
Yes. So if you are an employer in California, this pretty much would apply to you unless you have an employee. So if you have an employee that is teleworking from a location of the employee's choice, then you would not have to have this plan. Or if you have a place where less than 10 employees are working at any given time and the place is not accessible to the public, then you don't need this workplace violence prevention plan for that location. The other exceptions are if you are in the healthcare industry, if you're a healthcare employer, or if you're a corrections and rehab facility, or a law enforcement agency. So I think for the most part, I believe.
If you're a restaurant.
If you're a restaurant, it will.
And it's going to apply. And there is no number of employee threshold, correct?
No, there is not.
So basically, if you've got one employee, you've got to develop this plan and comply with these requirements.
Exactly, unless that one employee is teleworking from a location of their own choice.
Right, and you don't have control as the employer,
yes.
Over that. So very limited exceptions for the employers. So basically, when in doubt, this probably is going to apply to most employers in California, especially if you're a restaurant. It applies to you, and you need to pay attention to it.
Yes, and I think one other thing I wanted to just add to that is, yes, it applies to you if you don't meet any one of those exceptions. Also, you may be an employer who has assigned your employee to a location. You will also need a plan for that employee for that location. So simply because you're not in charge of that location, you must have a plan addressing that as well and coordinate with the site employer. Okay. Just to make sure that you've addressed that concern.
And that question comes up a lot too. And maybe we can talk about it. Well, we'll jump into it now.
Yes.
Multiple locations. You need a plan for each location then, right?
Yes. So you can have one plan, but make sure that it's customized. So it must be customized to each location. Okay. You may or may not have to customize it, but I would caution the employers to just review every location to make sure that the plan for that location must not be or must be customized. It could be something very specific as the physical location or the place that the employee may have to walk from where they park their car to the actual place where they've performed their job duties. Maybe different from location to location. So that one is specific difference will have to be customized for each location.
Yep. But to the extent your restaurant group, you've got a restaurant, all your restaurants are located in like very similar, mall settings. Those plans could probably carry over from each location, but you need to think about it. And that's the theme, I think, today. The plan, we don't want to scare everybody about the obligations to comply. It's pretty easy to comply, but you need to sit down and spend a couple hours on this and think about it and really think about each location and see if there's any differences you need to note on the violence protection.
Yeah. And Yeah, and once you actually look at the model plan that CalOSHA does have, and we recommend that employers start with that. Once you start looking at it, it will make sense. It will start to make sense, and it'll take you through the steps and give you examples of information that must go in the plan.
Yep.
So it is not as daunting as you may think at
Right,
first glance.
as it sounds.
As
Yep.
it
So
does,
let's
yes.
jump into that. So July 1st, 2024 is the deadline. California employers have a lot of different deadlines. So number one is coming up with the written violence prevention protection plan, or the violence prevention plan for their establishments.
Yes.
CalOSHA, as you mentioned, publishes a model. We've printed it out. We've got it
Yes.
here. It's a fillable Word document. Pretty easy to fill out, figure out. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a HR specialist.
Yeah. It has examples too, suggestions and examples of what type of information goes into different sections. So I think in conjunction with the plan, which must be implemented, you must have one by July 1, 2024. I think, Anthony, this might be a good time to talk about you have to also have trained your employees on the workplace violence prevention. And that has to be done before July 1. That is the actual reading of the law places that requirement that the training has to be done before July 1. But as we were talking earlier, I think if you come close to complying with that and end up having the training, within the first part of July, you may not be penalized by CalOSHA, but just, I would say, make sure your
Start
employees
working.
are trained.
And I would get on it sooner than
Yes.
later. So here we are in June 2024. I'd get on this written plan, get that developed, and out to the employees. Like, you need to get on it well before July 1st.
Yes.
And I think it's important. Spend some time on the model written plan. That's going to be your content for the training for the employees
Pretty
as
much,
well.
yes.
So spend the time, think that out. But again, it's not super complicated. They've got examples. You fill in the blanks, cut and paste. Pretty easy. The big issue, let's jump into that plan, talk about that for a minute. Right off the top, I think the big thing is who's responsible for the plan and the
implementing of the plan and what the roles of different individuals are. So basically, you're going to start with identifying the individuals who are responsible for implementing the plan. You can have more than one person, but just within the plan, you'll have to just lay out the roles of the different individuals if it's more than one person.
Yep.
And the plan, again, it sets forth, the name, the job title, what each individual's responsibility is if it's more than one person, their phone number, and their email address.
Yep. And it could be one person though too.
It can be one person,
Yeah.
yes.
So it doesn't mean you have to go out and hire a third party or a safety department or anything. If you're a
Yes.
small operator and it's the owner, and you're doing it, you can put yourself down
Exactly.
to administer the plan
Yes.
and do that. Yep.
And this is just to formalize, the person in charge, I believe. It's the person in charge who's going to be responsible for implementing the plan, who the incidents are going to be reported, in charge of correcting issues, maintaining the logs, and their phone number and their contact information.
Yep. It is a long document, but again, not super hard to fill out and comply with. So CalOSHA has done a great job setting out the examples and everything. One issue I wanted to point out too in the plan under the workplace violence hazard identification and evaluation, employers are required to identify and evaluate these hazards in the workplace for each locations. There is a periodic inspections requirement as well, and that needs to be done at least on an annual basis. And if something comes up in the workplace, then the employer needs to reevaluate, see if this plan needs to be updated based on something new that came to their attention.
Yes, it could be something new that's been identified, or it could be an incident that may have actually occurred or been reported.
Yep.
So that would just present additional opportunities to just reevaluate and make sure that the plan, is up to date in consideration of the new development.
Yep. And so for the inspections, there's a section here. You have to specify the person, their name, job title, area, department, section, location that they are responsible for those following areas. So you set that out. And again, just think that through. And then they've got some great examples of the inspections for the workplace. What to look for, the interior of the workplace and its attractiveness to robbers, need for violence surveillance measures such as mirrors and cameras. Yes. Procedures for employees' response during robbery or other criminal act, including policy prohibiting employees who are not security guards from confronting violent persons committing a criminal act. So a lot of this stuff, and I think a lot of employers have thought this through already, probably already have policies on this, but now it's just putting it on paper and in this plan.
A lot of this may, if you have some sort of a safety plan already in place, some of it may already be included in that. So you may want to obviously consult and review that and transfer over some of this that already may be in place for you.
Yep.
I think the other component, a big component of the model, Anthony, is that you have to make sure that the employees are actively involved in implementing this plan and the policies and procedures for employee involvement. So again, that's where the training comes in. That's where you want to encourage the employees to report anything they see that may not be apparent to you at the time you're implementing this plan, but on an ongoing basis. And then, in addition to notifying the employees who they can report to, how to conduct themselves in a violent situation or in an emergency situation, how they must comply with all of these policies that you're establishing, and then the recourse for employee compliance or employees who are failing to comply with the plan.
Yep. One other area I wanted to talk about too, it's in the plan. We'll have links to the model plan in the show description below too, and links to other resources.
Yes.
So this is all easily available on the internet as well. So easy to get the plan, download it in Word and change it. But there is a section towards the end too, the review and revision of the WVPP. Employers have to review it at least annually, update it. If there's anything that becomes apparent that they need to update. So that's an ongoing obligation as well. And then
the training. So
before we get to the training, I wanted to mention too, at the end of that model plan is the incident log.
Yes.
So a good example, employers could use this for their incident log. If there is a violence that occurs at the workplace, I'd recommend using this log to document it. The information needs to be documented, and just use this log.
Yes,
as
and
example.
so it's violence or threats of violence, and keep in mind that even if it does not result in any actual injury, if it's a violence or a threat of violence, then you have to log it. And then I don't know if maybe this is a good time for us to also, this log has to be maintained. You have to keep the records of the logs for at least 5 years.
Yep. Veenita, you mentioned the training. So that's the other aspect. So you need to do the written plan, you need to do training for the employees. And the requirement is July 1st. So you need to do the employee training by July 1st, 2024. And again, start with the plan. You could use this as your outline for the training for the employees. There is no hour requirement for how long the training needs to be. There are parameters of what you need to cover in the training, but unlike the sexual harassment prevention training that most California employers have to provide, that requires an hour or 2 hours, depending if you're a supervisor or just a non-supervisor. There is no hour requirement like that, but the law does set out what has to be covered in that training. And for example, it has to cover the following topics: the employer's plan, the written plan, how to obtain a copy of the plan at no cost, how to participate in the development and implementation of the employer's plan. Also, need to cover the definitions and requirements of the law. So
you can just give the definitions that are in the model.
and they're set out.
Yeah, they're set out.
Or very early on in the plan.
Yeah.
So that would be good to go over that. Give that to them. And again, the training needs to be adapted to the language of the employees too. So if you've got Spanish
Yes.
speakers, we do recommend having the model plan, the written plan translated. And the law does require for it to be in context for the employees that they can understand too. So
Yes, it has to be-
translated, and if they're not understanding the terms in here, make it simple for them
Exactly.
as well. Yep. And so some other requirements for the training, talk to the employees about how to report the workplace violence incidents or concerns to the employer or law enforcement without fear of reprisal. Also, workplace violence hazards specific to the employee's job, the corrective measures the employer has implemented, and how to seek assistance to prevent or respond to violence and strategies to avoid physical harm. Another item to cover is the violent incident log required and how to obtain copies of these records. And as you mentioned, those have to be retained going back 5 years, and employees have access to those too if they want to see those.
So it's employees and even Cal OSHA may.
Yep.
At a moment's notice, it has to be available for either the employees of Cal OSHA or an employee representative. So the training actually, Anthony, like you said, there's a requirement for an annual training. After the initial training, there is a yearly requirement for the training. And those records must be kept for at least 1 year. But all of the other records, those would be the actual plan, the incident logs, the violent threat or violent act incident log, the actual reporting and investigation of actual incidents, those must be kept for at least 5 years. So it's only the training that's at least 1 year requirement for the record keeping, but everything else must be kept at least for 5 years. And then within that, there are specific requirements of what is part of the record keeping, names and job titles and the dates. For example, for the training, it's the person that conducted the training, their qualifications, individuals that attended the training, their job titles, what was covered in the training.
And that's where I recommend handing the plan once you have that drafted to the employees during the training and say, look, written plan, if you follow the model form, covers most everything that's required in the training. And, talk about it, highlight a few things, but give them the written plan and say, review it. Let me know if you have any questions about it. And that's going to be a good evidence of what you train them on and provided to the employees.
Yes, and I think from the onset, that would also be a good place where employees can, because you want to involve the employees and get their feedback and their input on what else you can include in this plan.
Yep.
So,
and that leads me to the one last item I wanted to mention. There's a lot of things that need to be in the training. It's set out on Cal OSHA's FAQs, which we'll link in the show notes below too. But the opportunity for the interactive questions and answers with a person knowledgeable about the employer's plan has to be covered in the training.
in the training,
Yep.
yes.
There's some other requirements. We won't get to all of them, but it's common sense, I would say, applied to that. And I think a lot of employers have that type of policy already in place for this violence, but now it's kind of formalizing it. Two other things, wanted to mention it. We'll wrap up with the podcast here. Just how to stay informed. Cal OSHA's FAQs, those are great.
Yes, and they also have since published a phone number within their FAQs or on their page. If you go there, there's a phone number and email link, because they know that as this deadline is approaching, employers are having, more and more questions. So they, have published those two contact avenues that you can contact them and, be able to get your questions answered.
Great. And I would monitor the FAQs to see if there's any new developments for
Exactly.
questions that come up or changes to their
Yeah,
their
it may be
advice.
your own question that could become one of the FAQs that they publish.
Right. And then just as Veenita mentioned, maintain the and review the compliance records. So generally 5-year requirement. The training log is 1 year, but need to set up a way to keep these records for at least 5 years, have them readily accessible if Cal OSHA comes in and asks for them. And there is a component where the employees can ask to see them as well.
Yes.
So you need to be able to provide those to them. And I think that covers it.
Yes,
for
and then
general
keep in
overview.
mind that there are penalties, for failing to comply with these Cal OSHA requirements. So just want to, I think the biggest part is just having the plan, developing the plan, and then from there, each year, I think, is just updating and maintaining it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we'll have a lot of links to the
Resources.
the model form, the FAQs. Also, we've published some articles on our blog at the CaliforniaEmploymentLawReport.com. You can subscribe to that, look up some of our articles on that. We've had a lot of articles and
Yes.
Other videos, webinars on this topic.
We've done a pretty lengthy and detailed webinar, so we may have some clips from that. Yeah.
Anybody has any questions or want to see that, let us know. And I think that should do it. Anything else before we go?
I think that is it.
Okay.
Yeah, that should cover it.
Great. So I want to wish the employers, just don't overthink this.
No.
I want to leave on that note. Yeah, we're getting a lot of employers that are thinking this is like somebody has to be hired to do this for them. We've been retained by a few clients to help them, but it's something that employers can easily do themselves. I think we've been involved primarily more for busy employers that don't have the time to sit down and think this through and want this done. We help them with that, a draft of it. They still have to review it and put the details in for the location.
And I think some employers have questions, when it comes to customizing it. So they just want our input in, is this customized enough, and what else can they do? And does this, they don't just want to make sure that your plan is customized to your business and then to the location.
Yep.
So they want to make sure they haven't missed anything, left anything out.
Yep.
So
great. Well, thanks for being on the podcast today, Veenita.
yeah, this was great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to the California Restaurant Association or to Veenita or me. And wishing everybody the best on complying with this July 1st deadline. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed Confidential Bulletin. Your membership helps us advocate statewide on your behalf. You can also access tools and education that can help you be a better and more profitable operator while connecting with more than 22,000 like-minded hospitality professionals just like you. If you are not a member, join us. Check us out at calrest.org. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or professional advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or the management. Check out calrest.org, where we've assembled resources for you, including templates to build your workplace violence prevention plan. And don't forget, your CRA membership includes 15 minutes of free legal advice per month. CRA is here to help if you need it.